from a Star Network, Moonbeam, and Akala Network. Joe?
Thanks, Bill. And welcome again to everybody joining the second day of Sub0. It was definitely quite exciting yesterday, and today another good program. So today have quite a good panel joining me. We have Hoon Kim from Astar, Brian Chen from Akala, and Alan Saped from PureStake, which is the company that manages the Moonbeam network, or developed and launched the Moonbeam network. And so the premise for this panel is that everybody here has been in the ecosystem for a long time. Some of these guys, I know Brian was already building on Substrate when I first started getting into the Polkadot ecosystem back in 2018. So these guys all together have a ton of experience that they can share. And I'm going to kind of go through the agenda today in this panel from the bottom of the stack to the top. So from the bottom, we're gonna start talking a little bit about parachain development, and then move up into application development, and then finally what the experience will be like in Web3 for end users. So whether you're a blockchain developer, application developer, or just somebody interested in Web3, hopefully there's something interesting for you in this panel. So I'm going to start out by targeting Brian for the first question, just because he was already building on Substrate when I first got into this about 3 years ago. To give his thoughts on how the experience of using the Substrate framework has changed since he started developing on it and where it is now.
Hi everyone, that's Brian. So yeah, definitely Substrate evolved a lot during those periods. That when I was first learning about Substrate, is still I think the version 0.8 or something. Still using some syntax that is completely different than what we have today. Yeah, there are like I have arise like more than 100 issues, questions, pull requests. Like there are a lot of developer experience improvement during this period. Now we have a much better, for example, macro syntax system with the Frame V2, as well as a lot more advanced functionality. For example, in the newer version of Substrate, they just introduced the new scale coded type info, which solves a category of the issues of Substrate development. So there's building Substrate today is already a very, very nice experience compared to 3 years ago. And there are also a lot of planning improvements in the future I can see. So it will be also a much better experience in the future as well.
Yeah, Hoon, from the Astar side, do you have any experience from kind of when you started on this to how things are now?
Thanks, Joe. Yes, so when I first started Substrate, I think it was like about more than 2 years ago, and at the time there were barely any documentation online, so it was really difficult to learn what's going on. You had to go deep into the source code to really understand how things are working. But now I'm really happy to see how the community has so big. It's great documentation, builders program for people who want to develop on Substrate, and a lot of hackathons too. It introduces new developers to the ecosystem, and it's really glad to see everyone coming together.
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of move on to Alan with Moonbeam, specifically for this question, because all three of you guys, you're building chains that implement provide a smart contract interface in some capacity. And maybe we can go a little bit into the exact differences of how you guys see smart contracts in your chain and the exact interface that you provided. But a lot of the things we talk about with Substrate is that you can encode the logic for an application directly into the runtime. So you trust some application logic, and so you're going to put that into the runtime. And smart contract is kind of like a different application development model. So I'll start with you on this question, Alan. But what role do you see for smart contracts just in Web3 in general, or in the Polkadot network or Kusama network, where a team could actually build a parachain kind of from scratch and put this logic right into the chain?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a very interesting question. I think here, especially for us, because we're building, this Ethereum compatible network, And we see that the smart contract is definitely the future. Like it's more where everybody will be able to provide their logic in the system. And we always thought that Moonbeam would be a way to get into that direction. So right now in Ethereum, people are writing smart contracts and they're on some kind of limitation, mostly because it's limited to one network. And also like in terms of what you can do with it. And we always thought that smart contract would be the big thing and Parachain could be seen as smart contract. That's why we thought that in the future, our Parachain will offer the possibility to create like a separate Parachain based on our Parachain for people to build a kind of smart contract and a Parachain for their own services. It's like providing a step for simple EVM smart contract to more complex like Parachain smart contract, which allow a lot more, like as it was described for Polkadot. I think the big benefit is the fact that you will be able to rely on other Parachain, so other smart contracts also, to build your complex system or your big project, basically.
Yeah, and something I know that you've done in Moonbeam particularly is that Substrate comes with this kind of like set of RPC endpoints in the client, but you actually implemented a lot of the RPC endpoints from Ethereum into the runtime. So you actually have all these runtime APIs that make it compatible with a lot of Ethereum tooling. And yeah, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about how you see the kind of like the migration path or how people could interact with Moonbeam.
Yeah.
Then like the Polkadot network.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the work has been done by the Frontier like contributors. It's not only Moonbeam, but a lot of people, even Brian also worked on that area. So congratulations to them. It's very great because with Ethereum there is one thing called the precompiles, which allow to basically define a native kind of smart contract within your chain. And this is, for us, the kind of bridge that allow people to start with the EVM and then use those smart contracts to access the whole Polkadot ecosystem and to use all the Substrate features. So, for example, we have precompiles for the governance, and we have our own Parachain staking palette, and we also offer precompiles so that people are already writing smart contracts to use a Substrate palette directly. So I think this is a nice feature of Ethereum that can be used to provide this compatibility and then move to the next step of building directly like palettes for Parachains or even Parachain itself.
And Brian, on Akala and Karura, you've kind of taken that a step further where you have this EVM in the runtime, but you also have a lot of like very specialized palettes that are added to the runtime. And usually we think of, or at least I often think of a smart contract interface as kind of being like its own little world. Like the smart contract palette is kind of like, it doesn't really know about the outside world too much. It's very self-contained. And so how do you see the interaction between smart contracts and other applications or other palettes that are in the same runtime?
Yeah, well, it's also different trying to experimenting this new approach of developing blockchain projects that is basically somewhat like hybrid approach. So like one blockchain project, not necessarily just smart contracts or just Substrate palettes. It could be like both, including, so they will allow those projects taking advantage of both sides. For example, by using the Substrate palettes, you can access a lot of low-level unique features that's simply not possible to be done in the smart contracts. One common example would be customize the transaction fee paying model. So you can pay transaction fee with other tokens, or potentially could have some for each transactions if there are enough security guarantee. Then on the smart contract side, there are also some advantage that one being permissionless and like anyone can deploy their own smart contracts. Then also it will be easier to upgrade or replace or deploy new smart contracts because run upgrade on the Substrate palette is so more heavy work. So then we are experimenting in some ways to taking advantage of both sides. So we are currently working with a few other projects that they will be developing palettes deployed on Akala runtime. And then they will be also, again, exposing some of the features through the precompiled Alan just mentioned before. And then the smart contracts will also be able to access all these low-level features from the pilots. So, and then if they need to, for example, iterating, upgrading, modifying the tokenomics, for example, they can upgrade the smart contracts without any without runtime upgrades on the pilot side, because doing runtime upgrades can be a slower process. They require multiple days of governance voting, etc. So this will allow the projects deployed on Kala much better flexibilities.
Yeah, so kind of continuing with the runtime upgrade processes, we've seen with kind of like the growth of Parachains on Kusama, I think it's up to 11 or 12 now. So 12 including StateMine, which is the common good chain. The Kusama relay chain itself has evolved quite a lot with a bunch of runtime upgrades. And so maybe Hoon, you want to take this with your experience on Shiden, but how do you go about like keeping everything up to date and compatible? We've gone from XCM version 0 to V1 to V2. We've had lots of host function changes and other things. And so you do need these governance motions to actually get things upgraded and to stay in sync. So how do you what's your approach to updating your runtime?
Well, for us, it's always keeping in touch with the latest news from both Parity Tech and the community side, and also no sleep, talented developers just constantly working. But I mean, it's a very challenging thing. I'd say, trying to catch up with everything. Always getting your runtimes up to date. Yeah, there isn't really a single magical trick to automatically do that, unfortunately. Yeah, that's my answer.
Alan or Brian, do you have any advice for people who are kind of maybe launching Parachains now?
Well, I think having good communication with Parachi is something good to start with, like maintaining contact with them, because they improved a lot, their communication and also the way they do those upgrades and what it contains and the compatibility part. But you always have some questions about what about my custom like implementation of this, is going to be impacted, those kind of things. So I think it's quite important. On our side, we automated a good part of the process where it tries to kind of find what are the big changes, important one. We go with the team through all those changes and see how it's going to impact. And then we also do like multiple level upgrade in our own network. So we have 6 permanent networks, Parachain networks, that has been running for more than a year. And each one of them has dedicated purpose on how we're going to test things on it, especially on upgrades and everything. So I would advise people to try to maintain their internal permanent kind of networks so that they see how upgrading can be challenging and also can predict what would happen in their real networks.
Yeah, Brian?
So, well, at least for me, I personally just watch the Substrate repo, so I will get notified of every pull request, but obviously there are tons of pull requests there, so I'm probably not going to read every single of them, but definitely this will allow us to get notified if there's new change coming in, if there's potentially a breaking trend, is something that we need to be spend a lot more time to actually understand what this change about. And then you'll get prepared. Also, like, for example, Polkadot and StateMine is also a good reference point. So all the new features probably be used by the Polkadot and StateMine. So if we have some uncertainty of how certain features can be used and how do we use certain things, then we usually just go for Polkadot, StateMine, just to find if those features are used there, use them as a reference point to help us to understand how to use all the new changes.
Yeah, so let's move on towards application development. So far, most blockchain applications have been built in a synchronous environment. So they're meant to execute on a single chain. And now we're seeing with Polkadot and Kusama, applications that are kind of designed to work on multiple chains. So that could be kind of like from a front end perspective, querying states or submitting transactions on multiple different chains. And from a runtime development point of view, it could be how does one chain interact with another chain? When should it send a cross-chain message? I'll start with you, Alan, since you're maybe in a special case here with just being very Ethereum compatibility focused. How do you see development on multiple chains for applications, and what kind of implications and opportunities does the Polkadot network present?
I think it's definitely a great opportunity, and the good part is that we are now in a world where the async paradigm is kind of well known from developers. We tend, since like CPU started to be multi-threaded and with the development of application based on backend, frontend, we every developer now has experience about what it means to be async and what it means to have concurrent also like execution of the same part of an application. So I think here the developers, they already have the knowledge, but the important part for us is to bring the tools to make it in one point similar to what they are used to, also safe with some guarantees, and some of them are coming with XCM, but also we will have to provide kind of interfaces that are common and compatible, for example. And I think part of the challenge also is make sure that the parachains kind of agree on what a standard should be for those kind of interfaces. And I think Brian has done a good job on that side, where they started to provide like a repo with standards, and they're open to discussion on how to improve those. We've been discussed with them in the past on, for example, the precompiles set that we want to offer to people. And I think that's where the important part is. I don't have a good example right now on type of applications that can be built, but everything, if you look at the web right now, there's so many applications that are asynchronous and would rely on different components. You can even think, there's multiple ones. I won't go into details, but I think we can reproduce that and benefit from the advantage of being a blockchain behind.
Yeah, Hoon, how do you think about that Scheiden A-star?
Yeah, our network also supports EVM, and we also have compatibility with standard Ethereum RPC. So trying to maintain this compatibility while allowing developers to communicate with other substrate-based blockchains is very challenging. It's always challenging. Thankfully, with Substrate alone, you just have to work with just different types for network. So client-side wise, it could be simplified. But when we're trying to talk about making Ethereum smart contracts work with other chains, or even with just within their own network, people tend to think like it's basically bridges on Ethereum, and that's easy. I guess end user perspective, it could be similar, but the mechanism how bridges and XCMP works is completely different. So it's always challenging to provide an abstraction, right? And that's why we don't want to limit the developer experience just to Ethereum or just to Ink or just with Substrate. We want to give the freedom for other developers to use the network to its full potential instead of just relying on existing protocols. And that is why we are really working hard on what we call XVM, which is allowing interoperability and this seamless interaction within EVM, Ink, and the Substrate palettes, so that developers can leverage the power for working on Parachains.
And would that be like an interface kind of within a blockchain itself, so that like an EVM could interact with other palettes, or would that be for cross-chain messages as well?
It's going to be mostly for internal. It's like an internal interface, yes. But the ultimate goal here is to use that as like a gateway to leverage the full potential of XMP, rather than having to just rely only on Ethereum.
Yeah, and Brian, I know Karura has opened up quite a bit of channels with other parachains on Kusama. What are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, so like we already have been through the transition from the synchronized programming to asynchronized programming in the traditional programming side. So like in, I don't know, 15 years ago, like mainstream program language, they don't natively support async operations, but now all the mainstream program language have the async operators. So this kind of transition is probably going to happen in the smart contracts world as well. So like right now, all the smart contract language, they or synchronously, like on Ethereum, you have fetch loans that can only happen if everything lives inside a single blockchain. But now we are start transitioning into multi-chain world that things will become asynchronized. So I'm imagining we'll also have new primitives to the programming language that used to develop the smart contracts. Obviously, that is not an easy task and require collaboration of everyone, but it should happen. It will happen. Also, like right now, if you're using any modern applications, you are probably not integrating just one single server. You're probably integrating multiple servers, some for serving the main data, some serving the other logins, for example. So there's similar thing for the blockchain applied dApps as well. For example, the Kurura dApps currently already connecting to both Kurura network as well as Kusama, and you also will be connecting to, like, for example, Bifrost and other Parachains, so to serving for cross-chain traceability. So then we will see potentially one single application, but that component deployed into multiple different blockchains for different purpose.
Yeah, I'll leave this follow-up open to whoever wants to answer it. But like, how would you see some of these like atomic or what kind of mechanisms or tools would need to exist for some atomic transactions to take place? So if you wanted an application to transfer some assets of an account on another chain, but you want to avoid a race condition of some other cross-chain application attempting to transfer that same asset, what kind of like primitives and application development methodology needs to take place in order to provide these guarantees?
I think it's a complex one. Definitely, atomicity in that case has a special meaning, I would say. Where I think using the relay as an actor in the middle to provide a kind of sense of atomicity. It's not a real one, but it's one that can guarantee some properties of it. And that's how I see it could evolve to provide enough of those properties for the developers and the users of it to see the benefit, like if it was atomic.
Yeah, I can see we can probably leveraging from existing knowledge and building existing traditional applications, like for example, dispute database. And there's already a lot of dispute systems that you want to modify certain records across multiple database, multiple servers. There are already a lot of study on like strategies, what's the methodologies to ensure you don't have partial transactions. So we can probably apply those things to the blockchain. There will be definitely a lot more limitations and making things a lot more complicated. But we do have existing solution that can be used as a reference point. So yeah, that's definitely a solvable problem. It just you probably we will still need to spend quite a lot of time to actually solve them.
Yeah, similar with me as well. I kind of look at this handling atomic transactions in a parachain context. It's like analogous to having multi-threading at its low level, multi-threading processes on modern processors. And generally, the way how sort of quote unquote solved it is by having the operating system sort of provide delay abstraction for distributing these processes. So similar to that, I would say blockchains parachains should be the layer of abstractions that sort of allows developers to not really think about these atomic transactions or the finality at all. So all they have to do is just focus on what they want to make, and the blockchain is the one that should be responsible for sort of allocating these resources properly, which is not a simple solution at all, but yeah.
No, so with that, let's kind of move into the Web3 experience for end users. So Hoon, what kind of experience do you imagine for end users in Web3? And this could be 5 or 10 years from now. I think there's a lot of development that needs to happen.
One beautiful thing about decentralized networks is that the communities are really involved in it. It's a community-driven project, and with Web3, I would say the users are more conscious about what what kind of data they're dealing with, what they can do. It's not just about relying on whoever is providing that service, but you actually have, if you have enough assets or if you have of authority, and you're allowed to vote and decentralized governance some different ways. So I would imagine a world with Web3, a world where people are more aware of what they can do, and a world that's not limited by the providers or people who have authority over the network.
Yeah, Brian?
So like in few years' time, I will see we'll hopefully Web3 will gain a lot more traction and growing into more mainstream users. And one thing I think about Web3 is about giving people choice. So obviously, we will probably here will prefer decentralized technologies, but there are still some use case for centralized technologies. Like there will be, like, for example, my parents, I would prefer they have money locked in, for example, in the exchange where they can use forget password to get a password back instead of trusting the manage the private keys. So there will be different use case for both sides. So but they can still benefiting from the Web3 applications, the DeFi, for example, accessing through the centralized servers. So we're not going to just like pushing everything to the extreme decentralized way. Where right now it's almost everything centralized, and we want to go towards more decentralized way. So where we have servers across different ranges, there will be semi-centralized servers, for example, and then everyone will be able to find the preferred spots on where they would like to be. For people like who really want to manage their own private keys using hardware wallets, build their own blockchain nodes, they can totally do this. And for people who want to avoid all these hard things, they just want to trust some guys to manage things for them. Well, there will be also servers for those.
Yeah, and if I can add, my vision of in 10 or 5-10 years, I think the way I see it, and I think Polkadot is a big step in that direction, is to replace the decentralization of services, especially from a developer point of view, where right now when we look at internet in general, you see like all those different services and they're all interconnected in a kind of centralized way. And I think the blockchain is a way to replace all those interactions in a more secure and decentralized way. And I think Polkadot is a huge step because of the Parachain system that they're bringing. And I think in 5-10 years, we'll need to do one more step into scaling the infrastructure and scaling the idea also behind it to be able to start replacing those services that we use right now that are centralized into like decentralized one based on blockchains.
Yeah, and what kind of infrastructure do you see being needed? So like, as an example, like I see a few things like block explorers tend to index single chains, but I've never seen a block explorer that's set up to index transactions that or events that occur due to the interpretation or execution of a cross-chain message. Another example would be like MetaMask. It tells you, enter the RPC endpoint you want to connect to, like singular, but you might need to connect to 20 different parachains for an application backend. And so what kind of other things do you see being needed in the infrastructure world in order to make building these applications for users where they might not have to think so hard about the blockchain parts and just have a better user experience?
Well, I think it's 5-10 years still far ahead of us, but I could easily imagine services requiring, some kind of resource ownership or authorization, identifications, those kind of things where we know that the blockchain will act mostly as a database, and you would have then basically the parachain or the blockchain on which the logic is start to require that data from another parachain, which is dedicated to like identities or other parts. And I think like many of the services that we use today could be replaced by those kind of mechanisms.
Yeah, Brian or Hoon, before we move on, anything to add on there?
I have it's interesting. I think that conversation opens up to an interesting question where if you want to listen to those cross-chain transactions, would you subscribe to the sender and receiver endpoint, or would you just listen to the relay chains, block history or events? And depending on that, like development direction might be quite different too. And I think that's pretty interesting to see how it goes. And of course, most likely the way how it goes, people are going to do it in every way, and it's going to make development much more complex, be flexible, lean, and be able to adapt to the different libraries that's been built by the community.
Yeah, so I think to kind of like wrap up, we still have a little bit of time left, and so just yesterday, the Polkadot network started a referendum to open up the first Parachain auctions. So I think maybe we should just go around, and if everybody wants to kind of give the plans for their project and kind of what your say 6 month to 1 year roadmap is, what's next, and I think we could probably take some audience questions as well if you want to submit them to the chat, and then Bill can jump in with those when they're ready. So I think I'll start with you, Brian.
Yeah, so I guess a lot of it will be somewhat similar to the Kurura launching. So right now, Kurura have most of the features already live, like for example, stablecoin, the swap, the liquid staking, not yet EVM, but currently we're launching those in the order in Kurura is due to like more of the technical limitations because we just seeing they are ready. But on Akala, I guess the roadmap will be slightly different. We'll be launching them in orders that will actually make sense. And because we already launched those products on Kurura before, so we now we have pretty good confidence to know, it probably works. And then we can also plan in those betas as well as better collaborating with other Parachains to helping them, for example, cross-testing the tokens on the Akala swap potentially, as well as doing a lot more cross-chain integrations, which we are currently experimenting on the Kurura right now.
And Alan, I'm just going to go in the order of Parachain slot on Kusama. So Brian, then Alan, and then Hoon.
Thank you. Yeah, well, what an exciting time. I mean, we've been waiting for that for so long now. Definitely, important step for us. We are ready for it. We're gonna set up the crowd loan as people are expecting. We prepare for it. We'll have also a short setup phase after the launch of it, hopefully in December 17th for all of us. And and after that, the Parachain will be ready. We also have new features coming, like the cross chain is already kind of getting prepared in our AlphaNet. So, but I don't want to reveal too much right now. We have new projects too. So, very exciting.
Nice. Yep. So I guess you guys saved the best for last. For Star Network, we launched our dApps staking palette, which was on Ship Network, on the Parachain of Kusama, and been getting some great reception from the project. We've launched dApps Store to be the dashboard for staking on dApps, and I think this is something that being a Parachain really allows you to do, since we're able to allocate our block rewards, the applications that develop for or within the Star Network ecosystem, and instead of having to think too much about rewarding the validator nodes. And so far that's great, and we are really excited to be able to launch that to Polkadot network, and it's our plan. And after that, we will be focusing on layer 2 solutions, and also the aforementioned XVM to allow interoperability between EVM Inc. contracts, so developers are not just limited to a single environment. And it's going to be busy.
Yeah, for everybody. Bill, if we have any questions from the audience, I think we have 5 or 10 minutes left.
Actually a bit less than that, but we'll see how many questions that we can get in. So first, the most upvoted question was actually in the chat. What exactly are the lights, the twinkling lights behind Alan?
All right, so those lights are like LED lights that are controlled by a Raspberry Pi that is here. And it's actually used to monitor our networks. So it shows the block production of each network. Basically, I think I set up to one light is 1 second, and it just renew every time a block is produced. So like that, if one of them takes too long, I would see that, and I would be directly alerted. Find that it's the kind of projects that I do with kids to teach them, very basic programming, because there are some nice libraries to control those. So it's it's a cool project.
Yeah, teach them blockchain early, right? as well as programming. Yes. So the second question is, all of you have talked about particular EVM implementations. Are there a difference between these implementations that you can discuss between the various projects?
I guess I will start. So Akala or Okura were both built as a Substrate native chain. So the primary of our users will be using KS and Dot, for example. So all of our users will be using the Polkadot.js extension to integrate with our blockchains, and the address formats will follow the SS58 formats that is similar to the Polkadot Kusama format. But this creates a challenging to integrate with EVM tool chains because, they are expecting, for example, the 160 bits hex format, which is different address format compared to Substrate. So we have built some custom toolings to allow Polkadot.js extensions to sign and integrate with Ethereum-based dev applications. So people can use Polkadot.js extension to integrate with smart contracts. So people doesn't need to download two extensions to integrate with one blockchain.
Yeah, I think Brian said it right. Like the EVM core part is pretty much the same. Like the opcodes and those parts are very similar because it's pretty standard, but it's like the interaction with the other part of the chain or with the users itself that's a kind of different in our cases, where we adopted a part where we want to stay fully compatible with Ethereum like kind of interface. And and that's a kind of decisions on pros and cons, because it facilitates for us like migration from Ethereum and smart contract in general, but it also makes it a bit harder to interact with Substrate native features. So it's it's a trade-off basically.
Yeah, I agree. It's very difficult. I think all of us are work based on the Frontier library for the EVM, and so implementation-wise, I guess it's not that different, but the usage might be quite different. In our case, we want EVM to be strictly another option to allow different dApps to deploy on Star Network, and we don't want everything to be focused on Substrate as well. We want the freedom to use your ECTSA accounts, which is the cryptographic algorithm that's used for Ethereum based accounts. And we have this custom signature palette, which allows you to assign native Substrate transactions directly with your EVM private key, which allows you to execute cross-chain, not cross-chain, sorry, but just cross-virtual machine behaviors in a sense. So yeah, we have to have a lot of workarounds to do that.
All right. Well, thank you, Joe, Brian, Alan, and Hoon. We really appreciated all the input, and thank you for taking the time to answer our questions.